Hello, my name is Dusty Whirl. I work with the Texas Homeless Network, and today we're going to go over an introduction to Housing First. So the learning objectives for today are being able to describe core principles of Housing First, develop an understanding of Housing First versus housing only, and finally describe the benefits and challenges of utilizing Housing First. So what is Housing First? Housing First can be both a philosophy and an intervention. As a philosophy, it focuses on attempts to prioritize housing to those experiencing homelessness. It also views housing as a human right and not contingent on other factors such as being in treatment, medication compliant, being sober. It also views people as being homeless due to lack of housing and no other factors. So a good way to illustrate that is by asking the question, what causes homelessness? And there's a lot of correct answers, there's a lot of factors involved. However, within Housing First, the simple answer is what causes homelessness is the lack of housing. That's it. It also follows Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it focuses on safety and physiological levels of Maslow's hierarchy. As an intervention, it's delivered through a housing focused case management. The core aspects can be measured, meaning it can tell you whether you're practicing to fidelity, something's going wrong, and you need to change it, things like that. As an intervention, it also prioritizes those who are chronically homeless that has complex issues. And it also serves those with the highest acuity first. So for those of us that know what coordinated entry is in the housing priority list, or the HPL, knows that uh, the individuals at the top of the HPL are served first because they're the ones with the most need, the highest need of assistance. And then you work your way down the list from most severe or the highest acuity to least acuity. So then what are the core principles of Housing First? First principle is immediate access to housing with no preconditions. This is the first and most important step there is. It also does not require you to be sober, engaged in mental health treatment, have employment, or other types of incomes. The next principle is choice and self-determination, right? This is where individuals are given the control to make decisions for themselves. This allows them to make decisions on recovery, so what supportive services they need, the level of recovery they need. Is AA or NA correct for them, or do they need inpatient? And then the type of housing and where they live. This leads us to the next core principle of individualized supportive services. Supportive services offered are flexible and meet needs of each individual, right? It's not a cookie cutter approach. Each person has different needs. Regardless, all services, including case management, are provided in a client-centered approach, right? This connects back to the choice and self-determination principle. This allows them to be educated to make the decision that's best for them. It also refers to services that are also meant to help improve quality of life and increase housing stability. These supportive services are not required of the participant within a Housing First program to utilize or be engaged in. However, it is the case manager's responsibility or the agency's responsibility to encourage the individual to pursue supportive services. This is done through progressive engagement or assertive engagement, right? So another aspect of Housing First is harm reduction, right? This is where it recognizes that abstinence may not be achievable or desired by individuals. And there's also research that shows that it's not the most effective approach to try and solve someone's use of substance use. Individuals are supported in reducing harm to their lives, right? I know I've already mentioned substance use, but it can also be applied to larger situations or different situations. For example, using substance use, safer methods for substance use, or access to healthcare, or learning about available treatment options, right? Those are all examples of how you can reduce harm to the individual, right? So the final core principles of Housing First is social and community integration. This is the big one right here. Uh, this allows the individual to be encouraged to reconnect with their communities. promote social inclusions, which is important because individuals who are experiencing homelessness are isolated from their community. They are communities of themselves, right, within the larger community. Typically, these individuals are shunned, so they're not feeling connected or sometimes feeling ostracized by the community. To this end, programs should foster opportunities for participants to engage in social and community activities. And these aren't just random things around the city or town that these individuals live in. It's meaningful activity, meaning it's meaningful to them, not the provider, but them. So, for example of this, I had a participant who was into Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. For those of us who are nerdy enough to know that reference, good for you. But this individual wanted to participate, but was scared to because he was concerned of how the other individuals will see him because he hadn't done this in years. So what we did was we sat down and we looked at things that would work for him, right? So we looked at several game stores. He chose the smallest game store where there'd be less people initially, and he was encouraged to participate in any time there was Magic the Gathering events or Dungeon and Dragon events going on. And slowly but surely, it helped him get out of his shell and kind of feel connected again to their communities and his surroundings. So this leads us to housing first versus traditional approaches. So traditional approaches are the approaches that are treatment before housing mentality. You cannot get housed until you go to a sobriety program. You cannot get housed until you get inpatient treatment for your substance use or mental health services. Right? They require sobriety, employment, other types of income. Right? It forces an individual to stay homeless longer. And in temporary housing situations, such as shelters or transitional housing or transitional shelters, that may not be the safest environment or may not be the environment good for them or their long-term health and well-being. This is contrasted by housing first, which is housing as the first step. There are no preconditions to housing, and housing first is permanent focuses on permanent stable housing solutions, not the temporary. So, for example, I have an illustration down at the bottom of the slide that shows how housing first is very linear approach. Right? You have an individual who's experiencing homelessness, they jump straight into an apartment, a house, whatever that's permanent of their choice. And then from there, they're able to address their necessities, their medical concerns, mental health, behavioral health, substance use, addressing income. And the key point on the income there is unless any of them has tried getting employment without um, stable address or using a shelter address doesn't know that it's very difficult for someone to do because prejudices exist. And then this leads to life stability. So housing first is very linear, straightforward. Traditional approaches have a step approach, right? You go to step one, step two, step three, and then maybe housing unless there's more steps involved for a particular person, right? So this leads to what housing first is not, right? Housing first is not a one size fits all approach. It's flexible and it needs to be tailored to the needs of the individual. No, no two individuals are alike. Even if we look at individuals who have the same upbringings or similar pasts, one may need something totally different approach, a set of skills trained, others may not. Others may need more constructive conversations around life skills, others do not. Right. This is also important where individuals get educated about their choices and allowed to choose what would best fit their needs or wants. Housing first is also not free housing without accountability, which is this is one of the bigger misconceptions out there about housing first, right? Individuals still sign leases with their respective landlords, right? Typically it's a standard lease. Then they still have to comply with all the rules, right? Noise ordinances, noise rules, how many guests can be over and for how long guests can be over, paying their rent, things like that. They're still subjected to the same things we all of us are. right? Individuals are still responsible for paying some or all of the rent based on their situation with the goal of self-sufficiency, right? So as mentioned, they're still responsible for that, paying their rent on time or even portion of the rent while they move towards the goal of self-sufficiency in a housing program, right? Housing first is not a cure for all homelessness, right? This connects back to it's not a one size fits all approach. But housing first is an important part of larger strategies and works best when paired with policies that tackle poverty, housing shortages, and other systemic issues. It also works best when the local government is involved and is invested. This is illustrated a little bit later when we get to the case studies with Houston. So housing first is also not housing only, which is a very key point. Many misconceptions exist around housing first being housing only. Oh, we get this individual who is severely addicted to meth. We're going to house them, call it a day, walk away, wash our hands of it. He's on his own now. That's not the case, right? While housing is the most immediate step that is taken, it's not the only steps that are taken, right? When an individual gets into housing, they are offered supportive services. The case managers should be engaging them around identifying their needs and their wants and helping them get connected or encouraging them getting them connected to it. Right. This is the key where assertive engagement is important, which is used by caseworkers to assist individuals to obtain these services that they need. And it may take some time. It's not going to be maybe an immediate thing. Oh, I need mental health care because I think I have some concerns. They may not realize that I may need some assistance in understanding and developing the motivation or even courage to seek services. Right? Housing first is also not a reward for misbehavior. All right. It does focus on providing safe housing, which research shows leads to stability because it allows individuals to address other concerns such as substance use, mental health, medical care, gaining income, social security support, income if necessary, right? It also allows individuals um, to start addressing their necessities. So this leads us into the challenges and criticisms of housing first. Uh, the biggest one, and first off, the biggest one is cost and sustainability. Many cities, there is not enough affordable housing. That's everyone knows this. It's probably affecting everyone who watches this video, that it's difficult to find affordable housing for individuals with low income. So it makes it difficult for Housing First to scale their programs at a larger scale than maybe what they first start out as because there's limited supply of housing. Right? There's also concern Housing First is being monetarily sustainable long term due to the needs to support a service and cost of housing. Right? This connects back. There's not enough housing. Right? But supportive services aren't cheap. Other agencies are going to need to get involved to provide reduced cost or free services to individuals who may not be able to pay and does not have health insurance. Right? It also providing permanent housing is expensive with no guarantee individuals will not get evicted for a lease violation. Yeah, there's no guarantee, so it's hard for people to be like, hey, let's house this person. They may get evicted, and thus we've wasted all this money. It can be very discouraging. Right? And then finally, the cost of case management, mental health care, substance use, treatment, etc., which I've mentioned already. However, the cost also extends to the staff salaries, staff benefits, utilities of the area of the building that's being used, rent for the building that's being used if it's not owned. Right. And so moving on to another challenge is or criticism, should I say, it's considered a one size fits all approach, which I've already mentioned in a previous slide of what Housing First is not. Right. Some critics argue too much emphasis on housing and not enough addressing the reasons that contribute to homelessness. But that's the key word there. Contribute, not causing, right? Imagine being homeless and you're being told you need to go to substance use because treatment because you're not stable enough to be housed, or you need mental health care because you're not stable enough to be housed, and be like, dude, I'm trying to survive. That's all my singular focus is on surviving. Where's my next meal coming from? How can I shower, wash my clothes, get clothes even, right? Also within this category of one size fits all approach criticism is Some feel that without treatment first, individuals will remain in the cycle of addiction or continue to have mental health crises. Well, research shows that it's part of the process for someone doing substance use treatment, right, in recovery. They may lapse, they may relapse. That's normal. That's a cycle that is going to happen in their lives. But also with the mental health crises, people who are housed also have mental health crises. It's not just regulated to individuals who are homeless. This happens to everybody. Challenges and criticisms continued. So impact on community resources. Right, this is a big one. Some argue that Housing First pulls resources from other potentially effective models for addressing homelessness, right? These models, typically they're referring to are transitional housing or transitional shelters where typically the person's there for a short period of time to medium time to get back on their feet, learning essential housing skills like cleaning, cooking, washing their clothes, things like that, but also allows them to address their needs such as substance use, medical, and mental health while they are in a more stable environment than, say, a homeless shelter. Not everybody needs that though, because some individuals just need straight into housing. They're ready to go. They know how to take care of themselves. They know the basics of their activities of daily living. They're ready, right? It also leads to a burden on communities can be great due to financial burdens on local government budgets and social services to the need for long-term services. This connects back to what I mentioned previously, that with the local government, it could be resolved, could be the reason that they're the ones funding the services and fitting the bill for those who can't pay. Right. So then now it's concerns about community integration and safety. There's usually always a neighborhood opposition to having an individual who was homeless or formerly homeless moving into their neighborhood. This usually takes the form of Not My Backyard campaigns, and the focus is on property value, safety, and integration of formerly homeless individuals with complex needs. What's funny about all this is the integration of formerly homeless individuals with complex needs. People forget that those who are housed also have complex needs. Like it's not just individuals experiencing homelessness. Right? Complex needs situations exist for those. Mostly, the majority that are housed in that specific group are housed, not homeless. Same with mental health. A majority of individuals experiencing mental health issues or concerns, such as severe and persistent mental health issues like bipolar type 1, schizophrenia, the majority are housed, not unhoused. And then safety, right? Which leads to the next point of many argue that without treatment first, issues of problematic behaviors can lead to more crime, violence, and drug use in the neighborhood. Well, the thing is, those with severe and persistent mental health issues are more likely to be victims of a crime than they are to be a perpetrator of the crime. So then, now that we've finished the challenges and criticisms, so what are the benefits of using Housing First? Well, it provides immediate and stable housing to those who need it, right? Uh, this allows them to reduce their stress and uncertainty about their daily living, and then allows them to focus on more transition from survival mode into starting to become stable and or stabilizing so they can address their necessities. It's also cost effective for communities. It reduces the use of public services like hospitals, policing, emergency services. For example, in Denver alone, this led to saving approximately $15,000 per person annually uh, for those who used their services because it reduced their individuals' reliance on ambulances and EMS services, police coming and getting involved due to nuisance complaints, um, and freeing up hospitals' emergency rooms, right? And also the big deal here, it frees up emergency services for emergencies, which is a big one. Another benefit is it reduces chronic homelessness, right? It provides support to the most vulnerable to getting housed quickly with the support needed to be successful. And there are several case studies that we'll talk about shortly that addresses this, right? So on to the last two benefits of Housing First. So that is high rates of housing retention. Several case studies and research projects have shown that Housing First programs consistently show 70 to 90% housing retention, even with individuals with complex issues. That is huge. And finally, it's flexible and client-centered. This allows the individual to maintain autonomy, right? They're not being told what they need. They're not being told what they have to do just simply to get housed, which research shows allows them to address their personal challenges at their own pace, which leads to better engagement and recovery and self-sufficiency down the road. And finally, it improves quality of life, right? Individuals can then start focusing on their necessities like mental health, substance use, and employment, right? They are able to get care more easily because they're housed. They're not trying to figure out where to go for treatment. They're not trying to figure out how to get there as much. And then employment becomes easier to attain due to having a physical address and not attached to the shelter, which is something I've mentioned previously. So moving on to case studies and success stories. So Houston adopted a housing first model back in 2012. They called it the Way Home project. The city partnered with over 100 different agencies and organizations to solely tackle their homelessness problem. Okay? They were able to increase housing supply by converting existing properties into new affordable housing. They also implemented a streamlined system to match individuals to housing and supportive services, which is huge because if an individual or even a housing navigator or a case manager has to sit down and call landlords with the participant asking, hey, well, do you think this would work through your background checks and your requirements, and just have to keep being called and being told no, that cuts out all of that. Last year, they were able to show that homelessness was reduced by 60%. And to put that into perspective, that was over 25,000 individuals and families that were placed into permanent housing, and they maintained their housing at over a 90% rate, which is huge. This is an example of how Housing First is successful when you have buy-in from the city as well. Another example, excuse me, another example for Housing First comes from Denver, Colorado. In 2016, Housing First initiatives began to target chronically homeless individuals with high needs. They were able to serve over 300 individuals were housed under this program. And the focus on this one wasn't as broad as Houston's was. This was more focused on individuals with high needs only. Right? They focused on integrating housing with supportive services, which is huge for people with high needs. They found that participants utilized the ER 40% less and reduced interactions with the police by 35%, which led to roughly a rough cost saving of $15,000 a person annually. Right. They also found high rates of housing retention at 86% just after 1 year stayed housed. In this case study, it demonstrates Housing First can not only reduce homelessness, but also cut costs to healthcare and public services. Pathways to Housing, which was in New York. It was actually the first and one of the largest proof of concepts, if you will, of Housing First and pioneered Housing First approach in the United States. And it was one of the largest and is one of the largest Housing First programs in the United States. This program primarily targeted individuals with severe mental health issues as well as substance use problems. They offered permanent housing with no treatment attached or preconditions, but however, they provided on-site training such as mental health, job training, and substance use support. After 2 years, over 80% stayed housed, and they also found improvements in mental health and substance abuse management were shown. Moving on to some resources for individuals. So the first one is HUD's Exchange Housing First Implementation Resource. This goes through steps of how to introduce Housing First as a program, but also integrating support throughout your community. Next is National Alliance to End Homelessness. They're just a great agency to look for information on Housing First or other thing homelessness. They have several trainings on Housing First implementation across different types of programming. Next is HUD's Housing First assessment tool. This allows an agency to see how close to fidelity they are to actually practicing Housing First. And then it can help improve the quality of Housing First services being offered by an agency as well. Lastly, here at Texas Homeless Network, we do provide Housing First standards and definitions at the link below. And then these are my resources and references used. If there are any questions, please contact THN at texasboscoc@thn.org, and we'll gladly answer those questions around Housing First. Thank you for watching. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out through the email listed here. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.